Welcome back to Grit for Life podcast. I'm your host, Nate Parks. I am the founder of Grit for Life. Grit stands for Getting Ready and Training for Life. And if you're listening to this, if you listen to episode 15, this should be 16, I believe, if I got my numbers right. It actually is. We actually have a lot more episodes on our iHeartRadio than 16, but for some reason, our podcast started numbering them like this, and we decided to keep it that way. So we're pretty excited about it. But GRIT stands for Getting Ready and Training for Life. As I stated, and if you have listened to episode 15, then you are aware that these podcasts are actually a part of a 4-week workshop that we're doing on our Facebook called Your Time, learning to take charge of our time, learning that this is our time, our moment. The person who takes responsibility for that should be ourselves. Our response is our responsibility, and when we can learn that, we control our success and can learn from our failures. And that's important. That's vitally important. But with that, I want to take a look at an acronym. Now, I'm military, prior military actually, and spent a lot of time, spent almost 17 years in the military. Actually did spend 17 years in the military, a little more than that. And one thing I can tell you is the military loves their acronyms. And so with that, I can't break old habits. There's some old habits we need to break, some we don't, and this is one I'm not willing to give up. We're going to look at the acronym today that I want you to write this down, because we're actually going to be taking a look individually at all of these over the next few episodes. This is kind of like, I don't know, maybe an introduction to the acronym, I guess you could say. A groundwork, a foundation. And that acronym is STOP. So what I want you to do is, if you have a chance, if you're driving, do not do this. If you're doing something like cooking or putting out a fire or maybe even surgery, don't do this. But if you have the opportunity, grab a piece of paper, write down, going down the page long ways, S.T.O.P, STOP. That acronym stands for S, search your soul. T, today, take charge. O, observe yourself and others. And then P, prepare to fight for your time and your life. Push through the hard fight. Why are we looking at this acronym? Because I want you right now, if you've already done all that, or again, if you're doing something important, don't do this, but in your mind do it in a way. I want you to stop your time in its place right now. This moment right here, right now. And I want you to think, and I want you to listen, and I want you to glean some positive information from this. When you get lost, you can continue forward, and you may stumble across the right path. But how much further will you be off that path if you don't stop? If too many times, we have incidences, we have things that take place in our lives, situations that arise that knock us off our path. And instead of stopping, regrouping, taking control of our time, we just continue going. Before you know it, we're totally lost. What is something that we talk to our children about when they get lost? Well, we tell them. We talk to our children and say that if you ever get separated, I remember I have 4 children. One's in college, 2 in high school, one's about to head into high school. But when they were younger, we used to do things to protect them, to keep them safe if they got lost. And one of the things we would tell them is, when you get separated from us, we want you to just stop and stay where you are. Because what we're going to do is we're going to come back to the last point that we remember seeing you, and we're going to backtrace our steps and try to find you. And why do we say this? We say this because we understand that if our children continue to wander around, lost, the more they wander with no understanding of where they should go or where they even should be, the further they will become lost, and usually that could end up in danger. We tell our children this, but we don't live this in our lives every day. And so that's what I want you to do right now. You're saying, Nate, man, I'm listening to this and I just feel lost in my life right now. I feel lost in my job. I feel lost in success. I feel lost in my family, my relationships. Whatever it is, stop. Just stop. let's look at where we're at. Catch your breath. Because too many people have become lost in their personal lives, and instead of stopping, they continue to aimlessly wander around, hoping by chance to find what they're looking for. But that's not the case. Because when we wander around aimlessly when we're lost, instead of finding what we're looking for and finding what we need and finding that path that we should be on, we waste moments, days, months, sometimes even years, just tripping around in the dark. Remember times when when I was in the military, we would do night maneuvers and things like that. We had to follow somebody, or we had to know where we're going. We had to follow a GPS device, something. Or if we got lost, we could have a whole group of soldiers that are out there just wandering aimlessly. And God forbid, if you're in a combat zone and you get lost, you can end up wandering right into the enemy's camp. And unfortunately, that's what we've done many times in our personal life. We've wandered into the enemy's camp. When a young child becomes lost, let's go back to the child thing. When a young child becomes lost, at first they believe they will find the person they're disconnected from. Maybe you remember as a child, maybe you got lost sometime. A couple times I did, maybe in big crowds, maybe at a big event, maybe somewhere. And you start thinking, I know I'm supposed to stop. Mom and Dad told me to stop, but maybe they're just around the corner. And the more they do that, the more they become lost, but they believe they will find the person that they're disconnected from. And maybe that's where you're at in your life. It's like, I just keep wandering and wandering, thinking I'm just going to stumble across where I'm supposed to be. But the further that child wanders, the more fear begins to set in, because they go, maybe it's a grocery store, and they look up and all of a sudden really they're looking at a toy or their favorite cereal, and they look up and all of a sudden realize Mom and Dad aren't around. They go to the next aisle. Guess what? Mom and Dad isn't there. They go to the next aisle, and before you know it, they're wandering around the store, and they begin to get afraid that they'll never find their way, and they start crying. This fear many times will paralyze a kid, and fear in our own life will paralyze. And many of us become paralyzed because we don't know where we're supposed to be. Once this paralysis sets in, then a child will break down. And many times in our life, that's where we're at right now. Or maybe you know of a time and you're going, man, I'm broken. Nate, I'm broken. I'm scared to take another step, but yet I feel like I can't stop moving, and I feel lonely. And all the toxins and the toxicity of the situation that you're in, or even that child who's lost, begins to narrow their vision. In the military and law enforcement, it's very familiar. It's called tunnel vision. You end up zeroing in on one issue, not realizing that there's many things out there that you're missing because you're so focused on one point. And that's where we become many times in our life. We become focused on one point. And we can't figure out what to do, but yet we keep hitting our head against that same wall, or we keep going in the same path, and we don't stop. We can experience this in our personal life, within our mind, body, and soul. When we arrive to the point of that fear, this fear becomes the reigning power within our life, then something has to happen. And the only thing that needs to happen is for you to stop and take a breath and recalculate. But for a child, a parent or a guardian of that child comes around the corner, and that child is hard to even console. The child is crying and sobbing. Maybe you've seen it. If you haven't experienced it, maybe you've seen it in a store where this child's lost and they're crying, and then they see their parent and they break down and they can't even be consoled because the fear has paralyzed them. They don't even know they don't even realize that they're rescued. And in our own personal life, the same thing. Many times we become so paralyzed with being lost in our life that when the truth and the path that we need to be on is in front of us, or the person to lead us to that path stands in front of us, we don't even recognize it. Because all we understand is the fear of being lost. Again, as a soldier, I understood that if we veered off course, the most important thing was to stop right then and there where we were. You find a focus point that you can identify, whether it be visually or on a map, or both, preferably. Readjust to where we're at that point, and then set out with a renewed focus point that brought us back to where we're supposed to have been the whole time. Maybe you can relate to this. Do you find yourself with an understanding that where you are now is not where you want to be? Not where you're meant to be? So stop. We don't want, many times, the S part of it, search your soul. Many times we don't want to search our soul. This requires us to be honest with ourselves, and being honest with ourselves is the last thing we want to do. Being honest that we are not really sure where we're at. Because that, in an essence, drives home a sense of failure. But if that's where you stop and you don't search your soul and recognize that's where you're at, then you're not going anywhere. But success starts when you stop, you realize you're off path, and you're going to do something about it. It is difficult. Sometimes searching our soul actually seems very impossible. It seems impossible to confront ourselves about that we have misaligned our navigation system within our life's path. And to do this requires us to admit that we've not been doing it right. Admit that the path we're on has become the path we're used to. And the path we're used to many a times becomes the path we're comfortable with, even though we know it's not where we're supposed to be. To admit this means we must face and acknowledge that we need help. We need help to reset our course. Many times we don't want to reach out for help. We don't want to ask for help. But if we do not do this, then we're wasting time. Our time. Your time. Time that is gone. The longer we are lost, the more we become accepting of that position and even more comfortable, as I stated. And the sad thing about it is when we become comfortable with being lost, then that is an indication that most likely we're going to remain lost. Now, if you're listening to this, I hope it's challenging you not to be comfortable anymore. Search your soul and say, hey, I'm not where I need to be, and it's not okay. Because if not, you're never going to find your real self, your real purpose. Instead, you're going to remain lost, and you're going to sit in the metaphoric forest of your life and whine and complain and throw a fit, just like a child who gets lost and can't find his parents. So today is the time. This moment is your time. Right now is where we take time to take charge. That's the T, taking charge. Now I can offer you all the tools and every motivational program that you can find. But if you're not willing to take those tools and take charge of the change, then there's nothing, this podcast, words I put on paper, anything like that, it just become words. Or maybe a video or a motivational podcast. That's just all it is. It's just an object. Once again, just sitting there. It'd be like you sitting in a forest and I walk up and you say, I'm lost. And I go, well, here's a compass. And you throw it to the side and says, well, what is that going to do? I'm lost. You must be tired of being lost. And then comes the O. You must be ready to observe the horizon for a new focal point that will set you back onto the path that you set out to travel the day you were born. When we're able to observe that new focal point, to set our life's compass to, then it gives ourselves a new path, a different path than the one we're currently on. That new path may not be the easiest to see. I used to grow up around the woods. I loved the woods, and I would go wandering all the time. I hiked the Appalachian Trail for a week when I was a teenager. And I will tell you, many times, the path that you need to be on, not the easiest one to find. It may not be the easiest to travel. And that's the way it is with life. Many times, when we veered off where we should have been, then we must face more obstacles than we originally were meant to face. So maybe you're saying, I can't do this anymore. Every time I turn around, there's an obstacle. That's because you're not on the path you're supposed to be. But in order to get back to that path, you have to observe that new focal point. You have to stop, search your soul, take charge, observe the new focal point, and realign yourself, knowing and understanding it may be harder than you were supposed to face, but you've got to face it. Maybe the hardest thing you've ever faced, maybe even the scariest thing. But would you rather stay lost on the wrong path or face what you need to face to press forward to find the right path? The path meant for you to rise to your full potential. How do we overcome these obstacles? How do we overcome this struggle? How do we overcome that being lost? How do we push forward past all that we have avoided and feared. Because many times what happens in our life, how we get lost, is we see something ahead of us on the path that scares us, and we don't want to go and see it. It might be a metaphoric bear. And we're like, not really wanting to deal with a bear right now. So we take off running through the woods, and we get lost. But we have to find our way back to that path. Maybe back to things that we have avoided or feared. We have to observe. What do we observe? You have to observe yourself. That's the O. Observe yourself, observe others who are pushing in front of you. On patrol in the infantry, we would always have a point man. This was one who, in a way, exactly what it says, took point, was the lead person up front. They were the first in front of the unit. If you were behind them, if you weren't the point man, then you observed your steps and your direction. But you also observed their steps and their direction. They would come across the obstacles before you, and you would observe how they crossed over them or took them on. The point man was like the weather gauge. We could observe what we may be facing by observing the point man. And each person who wants to be successful should have a point man in their life, someone they can observe, someone they can follow. Maybe it's this podcast. Maybe it's someone in your life. Maybe it's a parent. Maybe it's a grandparent. Maybe it's just a hero. Whoever it is, observe that person and find out, how did they overcome these things? Pick someone directly in your arm's reach of influence, though. I challenge you to do that. Someone that has the same drive you want to have, the vision you desire to mimic, and is traversing the path ahead of you. Make them your point man or woman. Observe how they handle their daily life. Pick up on small details that they do that come natural to them. I can promise that those details that you think are natural, that help them walk the path that they're on, I can promise you those are what we call muscle memory. Anyone in military and law enforcement, again, will understand what muscle memory is. Anyone in sports, anything where you do constantly over and over to the point that you can do it in your sleep and you do it on an instant. But you had to get there. You had to work there. You had to spend days on the range. You had to spend days training. You had to spend days on the football field. Whatever it is, you had to do it over and over and over. So what seems natural to one person, and you may go, I never could do that. My wife's an artist. She draws things and paints things that I'm just flabbergasted by. I'm in awe of. And I tell her, I never could do that. And every time she tells me, well, you could, you just don't practice doing it. And that's so true. So the person that you pick in arm's reach of influence to observe, and you begin to see the things they do, what you think are natural, in order to be able to get to the place they want to be, that you want to be, I promise you, it didn't come natural. They went through rough times. They went through hard times. They went through training. Then it became muscle memory. I want you to write down what you observe. Make a list, a checklist of good qualities that you see that they do on a daily basis, that you believe makes them successful. Even sit down and talk with them. Then begin to observe yourself. This may be, again, one of the most important steps. You cannot just gloss over this. This will require you to be honest, to take time, to even return to your checklist over and over. You may check something off that list that you feel you've started doing well, but then a month down the road realize that you started slipping again. So you may need to even put it back on your checklist, but it is vital that you observe yourself and how you handle things each day and compare them to people that you believe are successful. Do not attempt to make all the changes at once on your checklist. Just like when we are navigating as a unit, we would not just drastically take a left or a right and attempt to walk directly to the path we should have been on. Because if we did this, then it meant we were not moving forward. In order to move forward, we just had to observe that new focal point. Observe the point man or woman in your life and slowly adjust as you move forward until you have corrected what you need to correct and where you're headed. Then comes the P. You must be prepared to push. Life's happening. It's happening right now, even as you listen to this. You're living. Each moment that you take a breath in life is moving forward and wrapping you up in it. It could be a little scary. But if you have stopped and searched your soul, you've taken charge, you observe the people that you need to observe, you can push forward. There are elements out of your control, and if you can understand that, that will bring you some calmness. And sometimes, many times, these elements will attempt to throw you off your path. In fact, if you've been walking the wrong path, but the easy path, many times, when the tough elements of life come at you, it's easier to return to where the path was the easiest and what you're used to. So you start going toward the right path. You pick a new focal point. You start moving toward where you're supposed to be, and things start getting hard. You're like, too hard. Abort mission. And you go back to where you were lost and you just sit down. Don't do that. If you return to where you were when you were lost, then you have taken all the time you have taken on the right path, and you've wasted it. And too much time in our lives have already been wasted. When our unit would come across an obstacle that seemed unmovable, or it would begin to rain or snow, or we would get a sandstorm and couldn't even see, we couldn't just stop. Because if we stopped, we would be in danger. We could not just go back to where we had been before the elements came upon us. No, we had to be prepared for anything. We had to be prepared to push forward, no matter what came our way. It is vital that you remind yourself of this daily. Push. My family and I recently faced one of the most challenging times in our life. The obstacles seemed insurmountable. The outcome, it almost seemed preset. And the effects that it would have on our life would possibly affect generations. So we had to take the acronym S.T.O.P. As the point man for my family, I had to search deep in my soul to find the hidden areas that would make me become afraid and weak. I had to take charge of those areas. Then I took time to observe others who had gone through times like this. And then I observed myself. I observed myself and how I was reacting and continually adjusting my focus. Then I had to prepare to push through. It took a year. Like I said, it doesn't happen right away. And sometimes it's not easy. In fact, most of the times it's not easy. But it took a year before we saw a break in the elements of life. And in the end, we as a family found ourselves facing a victory and success. But if I had just existed, made excuses, worried, feared, and not stopped, then we would very well could have seen our family destroyed and broken. So I'm here to tell you right now, stop. Search your soul. Take charge. Observe yourself and others and prepare to push forward. Why? Because this moment in time, this time, here and now, it's your time. It's time for change. Time for you to stop what you've been doing, reset your focus, and get ready for a powerful change in your life.